The first stage would be denial. Someone once said that denial was not simply a river in Egypt. I agree. Denial is an emotional defense mechanism to help us deal with an uncomfortable truth. You say to yourself, this can't be happening to me. There must be some mistake. Well, consequently, preceding denial is shock. Even with early distant warnings, it's still hard to believe that it's over. And when denial begins to wear off and reality begins to set in, you realize that you are hurt. You've been wounded. You've been cut off from the future, knees cut out from under you, cut off from your paycheck, responsibilities, associates, plans, cut off from dreams. The cut will heal, but it will leave a scar. So don't be picking at it and making it worse. How long does the pain remain? Well, for a little while, and then again, always. You know, one time when I was let go from a company, I remember that evening I was to take our family to the circus. It wasn't very fun for me because in the back of my mind was replaying the fact that I just lost my job. I remember years after that, when I was again gainfully employed, the family wanted to go back to the circus, and I found myself not wanting to go. So although I was over the sharp pain, there was still some lingering left over that never quite goes away. But there is a solution. And the solution is what we call the crisp, clean cut. You know, God sometimes needs to put a deflection in your direction for either our correction or protection. It is His way of helping us to grow. Listen to what the Apostle John writes in his gospel. He says, as he's quoting Christ himself, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it, that it may bear more fruit. Do you get the idea? In order to grow, to bear more fruit, you get pruned from time to time. It shapes you. It makes you sharper. It makes you more productive. I remember a little poem that I wrote upon a loss that I had. And I simply prayed, thank you, Father, for pruning me to bear your fruit more abundantly. The reality is it's over, finished, done. Don't linger. Don't try to hang on. Just figure this chapter is over, but the next one is ready and waiting for you to live. The second stage is called anger. Anger can move hurt to hate, and unresolved hate leads to bitterness. Sometimes you're not only angry at what happened, it's really more how it happened. It was maybe a sense of betrayal. Both seeker and spouse can be angry at what's happening to them or to their mate or to their family. As a generalization, most women tend to express or explode when angry. Most men tend to suppress or implode. So what's the solution to anger? It's what we call a cleansing catharsis. You know, time after time, research has shown that people who give vent to their negative emotions survive adversity better than those who are emotionally constricted. Really, suppressed anger, anger turned inward, is a common cause for chronic depression. Here's what Paul wrote in his letter to the Ephesians. He says, "Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger." It says, in essence, get that anger out, vent it, let it go so that you can move on with your life in pretty short order. But that's not the only solution to anger. A second solution is what we refer to as the rites of reconciliation. Here we go. Write 2 letters and a few notes, and then pray a bunch of prayers. The first letter we would suggest you write is to be reconciled to the death of the dream. Write a letter to your boss, or maybe to your boss's boss, from you, telling them what you might have accomplished if you just had a chance to continue on. The second letter is what we call reconciliation to self. In this, you change roles. Write a letter to you from your boss or from your boss's boss, telling you as honestly as you can why you really lost your job, what really caused the severance. It takes some honest introspection to put yourself in their perspective and write such a letter. And then finally, a few notes, which is really being reconciled to others. Write notes of forgiveness to any individual for any specific pain or any specific wrong that they might have caused you. You know, I love what Max Lucado, pastor of Oak Hills Church in San Antonio, writes in his book, "And the Angels Were Silent." Listen to what he says. He says, "As long as you hate your enemy, a jail door is closed and the prisoner is taken. But when you try to understand and release your foe from your hatred, then the prisoner is released. And that prisoner is you." So, 2 letters, a few notes. Here's the routine for reconciliation. To accomplish those 2 letters and few notes, set aside about 20 minutes a day until the task is done. Don't do it in one setting. Spread it out. Again, about 20 minutes a day. Find a place of solitude where you won't be interrupted so you can give it your full attention. Dump core into kind of a stream of consciousness without any censoring or worrying about editing or wordsmithing or spelling, and just let it all flow out for each of the letters and for all the notes. And if you can, and if it won't inhibit your writing, when you're finished, share your letters and notes with some safe folks. And now, I hope you're listening carefully, because here's the most important instruction. Don't mail them. Instead, ceremoniously burn them, maybe with some s'mores on the side. And when the smoke goes up and it's all done, then you're reconciled to all those people. But there's one more reconciliation that remains, and that's reconciliation to God. You know, all problems we perceive in our path are merely prerequisites for progress. Pray. Pray that God reveals to you the reason for this season in your life. Here's what Paul writes in his letter to the Romans. It says, "And we know," that means we have an assurance of knowledge, and we know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Following anger, there's the third stage, which is worry. Worry leads to anxiety, And when we worry about the future, when our future is unknown, when uncertainty breeds stagnation, that's worry. And there's a solution, though, to this stage as well. A couple we'll talk about. The first is more thanks, less tension. You offset worry with worship. Simple prayers of thanksgiving. Focus on what you've got and what you're thankful for having, not what you not got. Focus on what you have left, not what you have lost. Paul, once again, writes this time to the Philippians. He says, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all He has done. You might have lost your job, but maybe you got your health. Maybe you're struggling with your health, but maybe you got family. Maybe your family's struggling with the job loss, but at least you have talents and future to offer. There's always something that you can say, I'm thankful for this, in spite of losing that. That's the essence of more thanks and less tension. But then there's also the solution of more known, less unknown. Have you ever followed a guide who blazed a trail into the unknown? Well, it's unknown to you, but it's not to the guide. They've crossed this path many times before. They're helping you turn what you don't know into what they do know. And that's what our job is at the Career Transition Workshop. The more you listen, the more you learn, the more the unknown becomes known. The next stage in death and dying relates to depression. We find ourselves floating in a fog, kind of lifeless and listless, waiting, watching, lacking any real sense of direction. We start to blame ourselves, then shame ourselves until we spiral down and down to the depths of despair. Low self-esteem kicks in. We are nobodies with no value, going nowhere, no how. Boy, there's a solution to this kind of depression, and it's called uncovering the uniqueness of you. You are not a failure. Failure is an event, not a person, not a description of a person. It is an event in the lives of those who have tried, who attempted, who dared to dream. Henry Ford once said, failure is only the opportunity to more intelligently begin again. Or the actress Mary Pickford said, if you have made mistakes, even serious ones, there is always another chance for you. What we call failure is not falling down, but the staying down. God doesn't make junk. He has a wonderful purpose and great plans for your life. Listen to what the prophet Jeremiah said. He says, as he is giving the words of the Lord, he says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Your setback is not so much a defeat as a retreat. It gives you time to think about the uniqueness of you. There is something out there that is just right for you, just right for who you are, and just right for what you do. Find really the puzzle you fit. Like let's just say there was this single puzzle piece in a room full of puzzles. The fact that it doesn't quite fit this one piece in this puzzle or that puzzle is neither the fault of the piece nor the fault of the puzzle. It just simply means you got to work hard to find where it fits perfectly, and it will just someplace else. The fifth and final stage is acceptance. With acceptance of our situation, of our circumstances, comes a sense of resolve, a resolve that we have been rescued from the rut. I have a good friend, his name's Charlie Medlock, been in the oil and gas business for years. He told me once, there are good ruts and bad ruts, but a rut's a rut. The only real difference between a rut and a grave is how wide and deep it is and how long you're going to be in it. The Peter Principle suggests that some of us rose so high that the air was pretty thin, making it hard to breathe, and sometimes it's good to get out of that kind of rut. So what's the solution? What helps us move on with acceptance? It's what I call bouncing back. If I held a volleyball or a basketball out to the side, if I let that ball just fall in free fall, realize that it may not bounce back quite as high as where I dropped it. And by quite as high, I mean it may not, in your life, your career, you may not bounce back to quite as high a position or quite as high a pay or quite as high a power or quite as high as prestigious job. But you're at least bouncing back, but just not quite as high. You may never be quite as high as where you dropped it. But you know what? You take that same ball, and with a little force behind it, it may even rise to higher ground. You are the one that makes the choice of how much energy you put behind bouncing back. It's your choice. It's your call. Well, now let's move on to part 3, where we look at the length of a search, where we're beginning to find how long does it take to find new work. And we're going to look at norm and look at what is norm's length of search. Most job seekers are going to be out of work for a little while, and they're going to ask, so how long is a little while? And why is that important for you to know just how long your length of search will be? Well, here's our answer. You need to know in order to have realistic expectations. Success in your job search will not come overnight, and nor will it take forever. Knowing what it will cost helps you make the right choices. In the Gospel according to Luke, Luke writes this. He says, "For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.'" You need to know what it's going to cost you to finish this race. So let's look at maybe a standard rule of thumb. Here it is. It takes about 1 month of searching for every $10,000 of compensation you hope to earn. Now, there are many factors that impact that either positively or negatively, and we don't want you to misunderstand. We don't want you to misinterpret this statistic. I've got a cousin in Arkansas who's been out of work for a couple of years, and he now hopes to get paid $250,000. We also know that once over 100,000, it tends to flatten out. It's not strictly linear from 0 up to 1,000,000. Otherwise, if Bill Gates ever lost his job, it would take him somewhere past the rapture to find new work. So what's wrong with these standard rules of thumb? Well, these statistics are for norm, and most of you are not norm. This is really a game of chance. It's kind of like looking at a bell-shaped curve where norm is in the middle. Your odds or probability of getting a job are either going to be better or worse than norm. So let's look at 6 stumbling blocks and kind of take a reality check. You know, it's going to be what it is. It is what it is. But we're going to look at each one of these stumbling blocks and see how it may impact somebody's length of search. You know, hiring authorities tend to favor the least cost, least risk, least controversial candidates. Let me repeat that because it's an important axiom to remember. Hiring authorities tend to favor the least cost, least risk, least controversial candidates. Consequently, there are 6 hiring biases that can potentially impact your length of search. Many of these are based upon a classic work by the Swains called Out the Organization. What hurts are extenders, which lengthens your search. What helps are expediters, which shortens your search. While none of these factors are complete knockout blows, you must offset the decrease in probabilities with an increase in activity, an increase in the effort or energy you put behind the search. Career Transition Workshop will teach you ways to beat the odds of getting in front of the pack. So the first one of these hiring biases or stumbling blocks is age, gender, and minority status. Yes, the bad news is there is a hiring bias. If you are too young or too old, female, a person of color, odds are it will take you a little longer to find work. That's the bad news. The good news is, based on research studies, it is not that much longer. On the average, maybe just a few weeks more. For example, according to the Labor Department, unemployed workers 55 and older took an average of 9 more weeks to find work than their younger counterparts. Or let's look at gender bias. Gender bias kind of works both ways. It favors men in searches under 27 weeks and women in longer searches, but really in both cases, less than 1 month difference. Unfair? Absolutely. But don't let the bias of a few slow you down from finding the many that just want to hire the best person for the job, period, regardless of what you look like. So how can you beat these odds? Well, learn to be properly pointed at the right target. You know, small companies is where you should target. Target rapid growth companies. There's a reason for this. There's an axiom that mature companies hire younger workers and younger companies hire mature workers. In other words, the more mature you are as a worker, the less mature a company you should seek. Conversely, the less mature you are as a worker, the more mature company you should seek. Listen to what Linda Resnick, author of A Big Splash in a Small Pond, Finding a Great Job in a Small Company, she writes, small companies hire older people, women, and minorities at twice the rate of large corporations. You learn more about how to pick the right target in Session 2 when we talk about career choices and consequences, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's take a look at another one, where you worked. There's a bias about where you worked. Yes, the bad news is that there is a hiring bias. Odds are it will take you longer to find work if you have worked for, 1, only small, little-known companies. You'll be perceived as not experienced with challenging, complex operations. Or 2, if you have worked for only one company. you'll be perceived as knowing only one way of doing things. Or if you have worked for 3 companies for several short stays of 3 years or less, where you'll be perceived as a job hopper or worse. On the other hand, if you worked with one of the biggies, a legacy company, one of the recognized, well-run industry leaders, and you have worked more than the average tenure, which would be about 4.5 years for managers, executives, or professionals, or 3.5 years for the same type of folks working with technology companies, then you'll have a shorter search. Likewise, if you had an uneven career path, bouncing around from one industry to another, from one position to another, odds are it will take you longer to find work. What shortens the search is if you have a narrow field of focus, because truth is, the track record sells. There's an axiom that narrow gets you hired and narrow gets you fired. Therefore, be narrowly focused to get in, but once in, become more fluid, more flexible, broaden yourself from what it took to get in. So, how can you beat the odds on this bias? Well, learn to prepare a proper package would be our answer. Sell your character and competence before getting into your chronology or the history of your work. You'll learn more about how to identify your attributes and achievements in the 3rd session, 2-minute, 2-page resumes. If you have several short stays, try to cluster the fragments. And if you have one long stay, break it down into a series of shorter, focused job assignments. Regardless, your resume should relate your history to your future. The next stumbling block, the next hiring bias, relates to employment status. It is easier to get a loan when you have money. And likewise, it is easier to find new work when you have a job. So if you have a job, don't quit if you can help it. Better to have your current employer underwrite the cost of your job search than you burning through your life savings. So, how do you beat the odds here? Well, that's learn to prepare not only a proper package, but also to deliver the proper pitch. If you are unemployed, look like you're employed. Look like you're employed in terms of your dress, having business cards, phone answering services or messages, daily, weekly routines, have your headquarters, have your business plans, have accountability in place. All of these things are what you had when you were employed, so look like you're employed. You'll learn more about how to work with your ACT team for planning and accountability in Session 2, Career Choices and Consequences. And you'll learn more about business cards, phones, and call answering services in Session 4, Communication Connection. And finally, you'll learn more about how to dress to impress, to get suited for success in Session 8 when we talk about interviewing tactics. Well, the 4th bias relates to educational status. Yes, the bad news is there is a hiring bias. No degree really hurts. The good news is that an advanced degree in your professional field from a leading school really helps. But after about 15 years of work experience, the impact of your educational status doesn't matter much at all. It may be important, but it becomes less relevant. How can you beat the odds here? Well, learn to commit to continuous learning and growth. If you lack a degree, enroll in an education extension. Always be learning something new. And read. The final stumbling block or hiring bias relates to marital status. You know, the good news is there really is no negative bias here. if you're one of the following. If you're a dink, a dude, or divorced. A dink means dual income, no kids. A dude is another known word for being single. And divorce is also known as single again. But there is a positive bias if you are married with kids. You'll be perceived as demonstrating stability, commitment, values, maturity. So, how do you beat the odds? Well, remain properly partnered. Here's the joke. Stay married until you get employed and then you can dump them. No, I'm really just joking about all that. So you look at it all and you sum it all up and you look at the sixth and final stumbling block, and it's a formula. LOS equals F parentheses, LOS close parentheses, or LOS is a function of LOS, or stated another way, the length of search is a function of the length of search. Last but not least is the fact that the length of search is a function of the length of search. The longer you're out of work, the longer you will be out of work. Why? Because people say if you're as good as you say you are, then why haven't you landed a job by now? So how can you beat the odds? Learn to be committed to your campaign, not just involved. There's a difference between being committed and involved. Same as your breakfast of ham and eggs. You see, the hog was committed, but the chicken was only involved. You need to commit to coming to the Career Transition Workshop each week, to continuing to listen time and time again to the sessions on this CD, and learn how to beat the odds and shorten your search. That's commitment. Well, you have learned how to beat the odds on these 6 stumbling blocks, these 6 hiring biases. Let's now look at it in a more positive way. What are the top 10 tasks you need to do to beat the odds overall?